Harper Perennial and HarperAudio present What We Leave Behind, a Novel by Sue Halpern. Performed by Alexa Elmy and Allyson Ryan. To my family, of course. Chapter 1. Melody Marcus pulled a piece of paper from the pocket of her skirt and smoothed out its creases on the lectern in front of her. She looked down at her shoes. The black Doc Martens her mother Delia said looked like combat boots. Which is fine if that's the look you're going for. Which was clearly not an endorsement. Then trained her eyes on the pink and purple gladiolus at the back of the room, so it seemed as though she was looking at the crowd, which, to a person, had grown perfectly still when she rose from her chair and walked up to the microphone. The place was packed, with neighbors and relatives who had flown in the night before or driven up from the city, and friends of her parents and 2 rows of her father's employees, her friend Carolina, and some other kids from school who ordinarily would not have acknowledged her existence. The mean girls and the dopey boys in their thrall. And strangers. So many strangers. It was a good crowd, her mother would have said if she'd been there. But she was not, because she was dead. 2 days dead already. Jews like to get theirs in the ground right away, she'd heard a woman somewhere behind her whisper before the service began. Though Delia would not be going into the ground. Not that way. There was no casket. No need for a phalanx of solemn men to shoulder her body, permanently sequestered in a pine box. No need for a hearse to deliver it to a hole that had been dug that morning. Delia had been reduced to ash, and her cremains, as the funeral director, Mr. Mason, called them, were packed into a terracotta urn resting on a table to the left of the lectern where Melody stood, feeling the hectic drumbeat of her heart. To remind everyone that Delia had been a real live person just 2 days before, Mr. Mason had set up a digital picture frame next to the urn, broadcasting pictures of her mother whose face, more often than not, was obscured by the big brimmed hats she wore to shield her face from the sun, because she said she didn't want to end up a wrinkled old woman. What was it that people said? Be careful what you wish for? Well, Delia Marcus would neither grow old nor get wrinkled. Melody was in shock. That's what everyone kept telling her. Mr. Mason, the police, the women who materialized on their doorstep with casseroles and deli platters. So she guessed she was. 2 days ago, she was in her room with the door closed, with Mumford & Sons playing through the tinny speakers of her laptop. Ostensibly studying for the SAT, but mostly scrolling aimlessly through the internet. She was a senior and a good enough student, and the last thing she wanted to do on the weekends was sit in yet another classroom listening to some Harvard graduate, who for some reason was working for the Princeton Review and not Goldman Sachs, explain all the tricks that got him 10 points shy of a perfect score. The deal was that she'd study on her own, and if her scores weren't high enough, she'd take the class. Her father, Eddie, was at the club, palling around with his regular crew. Bagman, they called him, because he was the CEO of the biggest and most lucrative paper bag company in the country. Even if you've got flying cars and people living on Mars, you're always going to need paper bags. They're evergreen, he'd say, laughing at his own joke. Eddie, gregarious and affable, was a man of many jokes. It had been a crazy wet summer, and the ground had finally dried out enough to play the full 18 holes. Delia was off on a shopping expedition. Something about sniffing out a sample sale somewhere. Hunting and gathering was her favorite pastime. Though earlier in her life, before Melody, she'd been a lawyer at a firm in Manhattan, a litigator. Melody didn't hear the doorbell, didn't hear the knocking. And then, suddenly, their next-door neighbor, Mrs. Shine, was standing outside her bedroom, frantically calling her name. "Come," she commanded when Melody opened the door. She followed the woman down the stairs, where two uniformed state troopers.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?